In 1948, you received a phone call from someone asking you to essentially fly for a Jewish state that wasn't yet in creation. Isn't that true?
That is correct. 1948, I received a phone call from a fellow in New York who told me that Israel was going to declare itself a state and that we're going to be attacked, and we had airplanes but no one to fly them. And would I be available to help the cause?
What was your response?
Well, of course I went. I couldn't have lived with myself unless I did if I did otherwise. So I went to, started out in the States, wound up in Czechoslovakia, learning to fly the airplanes that Israel was able to acquire because there was a worldwide arms embargo on at the time. So while thousands of airplanes were rusting and rotting in American airfields, the only thing Israel could get at the time were Czech-built Me-109s, which the Germans flew in World War II. And of course these were not exactly the same airplanes that the Germans had, because the factory that manufactured the engines had burned down, so they had a Mickey Mouse a bomber engine and stick it into this airframe, which made it into what the Czechs called a mezik, which is Czech for mule.
And how many missions did you fly in for Israel?
Strangely enough, another 25. And I flew escort missions, escorting bombers, did a lot of photo reconnaissance missions, patrols over the Sinai and the Negev.
Your commander in Israel was Ezer Weitzman, and
no, he wasn't my commander.
Okay.
My commander in Israel was Muddy Alone.
Okay, thanks.
Ezer Weitzman was just another pilot
Okay.
in 101 in 1948, who of course went on to become Deputy Chief of Staff and then left the military and wound up as Israel's 7th president. And we remained friends up until his demise about 10 years ago.
He was a military man through and through, but tell me what his attitudes were towards war.
Well, he's the guy that really was responsible for launching the Six-Day War. Rabin, of course, was paralyzed, couldn't make up his mind what to do, and Ezer finally said, took over, just literally took over, and launched the strike on, June 5th, that took out the air forces within 4 or 5 hours of 5 countries, and enabled Israel to conquer their foes in 6 days. And of course, it's called the Six-Day War.
Going back to 1948, did you see that as another example of defending the country?
Oh, absolutely. They couldn't have made it without us. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't realize it at the time. But later on, historians said if it hadn't been for the Machalniks, the volunteers from abroad, Israel would not exist today. And so I feel personally that we accomplished a great deal. There were only 600,000 Jews in Israel, the new state of Israel in 1948, and they lost 6,000 people, which is 1% of the population. That would be the equivalent of the United States losing over 3 million people in a 6-month period in hostilities.